Imagine walking into your kitchen and realizing that your pantry only held half of what you were used to. No mountains of sugar, no endless cartons of eggs, and no shelves full of canned goods waiting to be used. Instead, you'd have a small book of ration stamps, a limited allowance of ingredients, and the challenge of feeding an entire family 3 times a day. This was not some abstract experiment. It was the reality for millions of families across the world during World War II. Meals weren't just about taste. They were about survival, creativity, and stretching every crumb as far as it would go. If you've ever wondered what resilience looks like on a dinner plate, stay with me, because today we're diving deep into the meals people cooked during World War II rationing. By the end, you won't just learn about meals, you'll understand the determination, resourcefulness, and clever substitutions that defined a generation's cooking. And who knows, you may even feel inspired to try 1 or 2 of these historic meals yourself. The kitchen front. When World War II broke out, the battlefield wasn't just in Europe or the Pacific. It stretched right into kitchens across America, Britain, and beyond. Governments introduced rationing systems to ensure that soldiers were supplied, resources weren't wasted, and everyone had a fair share of scarce items. Sugar, butter, meat, coffee, flour, and even fresh vegetables became precious commodities. Housewives, farmers, and home cooks were suddenly turned into strategists, figuring out how to nourish their families while making do with less. Cookbooks, government pamphlets, and radio programs offered guidance on how to stretch food, substitute ingredients, and find nutrition in unexpected places. Meals during rationing were not glamorous, but they were filled with ingenuity. Families learned how to make mock dishes like mock duck out of sausage or mock cream from margarine and sugar. They used every part of vegetables, even the peels and tops, and repurposed leftovers in ways that modern kitchens rarely consider. Let's step into that world and explore the meals that kept people going during one of history's most challenging decades, the early war years, adapting to shortage. Meal 1. Woolton Pie. Named after Lord Woolton, Britain's Minister of Food, Woolton Pie became a symbol of wartime cooking. It was a vegetable pie made with whatever root vegetables were available: carrots, parsnips, turnips, potatoes, all chopped and cooked under a crust made from wholemeal flour or potato. There was no meat, no butter, no indulgence, just sustenance. Though not exactly a gourmet dish, Woolton Pie became iconic because it reflected the government's push for healthier, plant-based meals when meat was scarce. Housewives spiced it up with herbs, stock cubes, or even a little cheese if they could find it. Children often groaned at the sight of it, but for many families it was the only warm dish they could rely on. Its legacy isn't in taste, but in symbolism. It captured a nation's resilience, proving that even the simplest foods could carry a sense of pride, endurance, and togetherness during some of the darkest years. Meal 2. Victory Garden Stew. To help with food shortages, families were encouraged to grow their own produce in victory gardens. Backyards, schoolyards, and even public parks were converted into plots for growing carrots, beets, cabbages, and peas. These vegetables often went straight into hearty stews. Victory Garden. Stew was simple. Throw together whatever vegetables you had, bulk it up with barley or oats, and simmer it into a filling meal. Meat, if included, was minimal, perhaps just a scrap of bacon or a bone for flavor. These stews became the cornerstone of wartime dining, stretching small harvests into big pots that could feed an entire household. What made them memorable was not just the taste, but the shared effort behind them. Families tended their gardens with pride, children were taught to value every pea pod and potato, and meals like this became daily proof that resourcefulness and cooperation could put food on the table when supplies were thin. Meal 3. Mock duck. One of the most famous mock dishes was mock duck. With real duck or chicken often unavailable, housewives made a stuffing of oats, breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs, then wrapped it in sausage meat or even cabbage leaves. The result was roasted to resemble a bird. Families didn't just eat to survive, they longed for familiar flavors. Mock duck was a way to preserve the ritual of a Sunday roast, even if the centerpiece wasn't what it used to be. The dish carried an emotional weight. Carving into something that resembled poultry brought comfort and a sense of normalcy. In many homes, it was dressed with a little gravy made from vegetable scraps or bones, helping to elevate the illusion. Children grew up remembering mock duck not as a poor substitute, but as part of their family tradition, a reminder of how creativity in the kitchen could transform hardship into moments of joy and togetherness. Meal 4. Potato cakes and potato scones. Potatoes became the savior of rationing-era kitchens. Abundant and versatile, they replaced flour in many meals and even found their way into desserts. Potato cakes and scones were made with mashed potatoes, flour, and a little fat, fried or baked to make them filling. For families who couldn't afford bread or whose ration coupons didn't stretch far enough, potatoes provided bulk and energy. Kids often ate them hot off the griddle with a bit of jam if sugar was available. They were also easy to prepare and could be made in large batches, ensuring that nothing went to waste. Housewives found endless ways to reinvent the humble spud, from savory to sweet, proving its adaptability. These scones and cakes, though born of necessity, often became family favorites, remembered fondly even after rationing ended. The potato, humble and hearty, was truly the backbone of survival in the kitchen. Meal 5. Carrot marmalade. Sugar shortages were one of the hardest adjustments. To compensate, families turned to naturally sweet vegetables like carrots and beets. Carrot marmalade was one such invention, made by simmering grated carrots with a little sugar and citrus peel, creating a jam-like spread. Not only did it provide sweetness for toast or porridge, but it also became a symbol of ingenuity. The government even promoted carrots heavily, suggesting everything from carrot soup to carrot cookies. There was even propaganda claiming that carrots helped pilots see in the dark, to encourage their consumption. Children sometimes enjoyed it without realizing it was vegetable-based, and for mothers, it was a way to stretch precious sugar rations without losing the joy of a sweet treat at breakfast. Carrot marmalade became more than food. It was a clever solution that kept spirits high and bellies satisfied when luxuries like jam or honey were simply out of reach. Meal 6. Meatless loaf. Inspired by traditional meatloaf but adapted for rationing, meatless loaf was a mixture of oats, breadcrumbs, leftover vegetables, and just a little minced meat if available. Baked in a tin, it's sliced up just like the real thing and could be served with gravy to make it feel more substantial. These loaves were often seasoned with ketchup, mustard, or herbs, giving families a sense of normalcy. For many, this was comfort food in disguise, making do with scraps while keeping the illusion of a hearty dinner. Housewives took pride in making their meatless loaf look convincing, often glazing the top with a smear of sauce or fat for shine. Children, who often longed for real meat, were tricked into enjoying it when served alongside potatoes and vegetables. It wasn't just a meal, it was an exercise in ingenuity, showing how simple kitchen staples could be transformed into something that carried the taste and spirit of a familiar meal. The role of leftovers waste was unthinkable during the war. Leftovers weren't scraps to be tossed, they were tomorrow's lunch. Roast vegetables could be turned into soup, breadcrumbs could become coating for fried patties, and bones could be simmered until they gave up every last bit of flavor. Families kept jars of drippings from meat, which could be used to fry potatoes or flavor gravies. Even stale bread was treasured, made into bread pudding or thickeners for soups. This frugality became second nature. Every peel, crust, and scrap had value. Children were taught from an early age to waste not, want not, and kitchen creativity became a badge of honor. The art of repurposing food didn't just stretch rations, it created entirely new meals that often surprised with their heartiness. Leftovers, once seen as second-rate, became proof that a skilled home cook could turn almost nothing into something nourishing. Meal 7. Dripping sandwiches. It might sound odd today, but one common meal was dripping sandwiches. Families saved fat that dripped off meat and spread it onto bread, sometimes sprinkling it with salt. It was cheap, it was filling, and it provided calories during a time when every ounce of fat was considered vital. While not glamorous, dripping sandwiches were the definition of resourceful eating. For children, they sometimes became a treat, with the savory richness taking the place of butter or jam that might not be available. Adults appreciated them for their energy-giving qualities, especially when heavy labor demanded sustenance. Though many would later associate dripping sandwiches with hardship, they were also remembered with a strange fondness, a reminder of how even the humblest foods became lifesavers in kitchens that had to stretch every ration to the limit. Meal 8. National Loaf. Bread was rationed too, but the government introduced the National Loaf, a coarse, gray bread made with wholemeal flour. It was denser, rougher, and less tasty than pre-war white bread, but it was healthier and used less refined flour. Though disliked at first, it became a staple. Toasted, buttered, or used for sandwiches, the National Loaf was in nearly every home. Its heavy texture made it filling, and many families grew accustomed to it over time. Housewives found inventive ways to make it more palatable, soaking it in milk for puddings, spreading it with homemade carrot marmalade, or frying it in dripping. It was a reminder that while luxuries had disappeared, the essentials of survival remained within reach. By the war's end, the National Loaf had fed millions, leaving behind a legacy of practicality that lingered in post-war diets. Meal 9. Mock cream desserts didn't escape the rationing squeeze. With cream and butter scarce, cooks devised mock cream by whipping margarine with sugar and milk. While it didn't quite match real cream, it was close enough to use in cakes, pastries, and puddings. It gave families a taste of indulgence, in an era when real luxuries were few and far between. Children often couldn't tell the difference, and for birthdays or holidays, mock cream was a small miracle that allowed cakes to look festive even when ingredients were scarce. For adults, it was a reminder of what was missing, yet it was also proof of determination not to let rationing steal all joy. Mock cream may have been a compromise, but it was one that brought smiles to the table, keeping alive the tradition of celebrating even in the midst of sacrifice, when rationing deepened. As the war dragged on into the mid-1940s, shortages became even more severe. Ships carrying food were sunk, supply lines were stretched thin, and even the most basic goods were harder to come by. Families that had already adapted to smaller portions now had to tighten their belts further. By 1943 and 1944, ration books grew even thinner, and substitutions became more daring. Families found ways to create sweet treats without sugar, hearty dinners without meat, and even celebratory meals for holidays when eggs and butter were nearly impossible to obtain. These weren't just meals, they were lessons in resilience, in turning scarcity into something that still brought comfort. Meal 10. Powdered egg. Dishes. Fresh eggs were among the most tightly rationed items. In the United States, families were given dried, powdered eggs as a substitute. Housewives learned to reconstitute the powder with water and use it in baking, scrambles, and even puddings. Powdered eggs had a distinctive taste that many disliked, but they kept cakes fluffy and breakfast possible. Children often grew up never knowing what a fresh egg tasted like until the war ended. Yet, families adapted, turning what could have been a disappointment into something nourishing. Many mothers became experts at masking the flavor by adding herbs, onions, or even milk if available. Pancakes, muffins, and puddings often carried the unmistakable signature of powdered eggs, but the sense of having something on the table mattered far more than taste. When war ended and fresh eggs returned, many remarked on how strange and luxurious they seemed compared to the wartime substitute. Meal 11. Mock fish cakes. Fish was sometimes available, but even that supply wasn't steady. To fill the gap, cooks made mock fish cakes from mashed beans or potatoes, flavored with seaweed, herbs, or fish drippings if they had any. It might not have fooled anyone, but it provided texture, protein, and variety. Families often joked about mock dishes, but behind the humor was gratitude. They had something to eat, and that was what mattered most. These cakes were fried until golden, giving them a crispness that mimicked real fish. Sometimes children truly believed they were eating the real thing, especially when served with a splash of vinegar. Mock fish cakes symbolize the creativity of the home front, where illusion and sustenance went hand in hand. Even long after the war, some families kept the meal alive, not out of necessity but as a reminder of resilience and the ability to make do with almost nothing. Meal 12. National pudding. Desserts were deeply missed, so cooks turned to puddings made from breadcrumbs, oats, and a little dried fruit. National pudding was one such dish, combining stale bread with milk, suet, or margarine flavored with spices or syrup if available. This dish was not just about indulgence, it was about creating a sense of normal life. Sitting down to pudding after dinner meant that life still had rhythm, even in wartime. The pudding could be steamed or baked, filling the kitchen with a comforting aroma that softened the harshness of rationing. Children looked forward to it as the highlight of the week, and parents felt a sense of relief in providing a sweet moment for their families. Though simple, it carried emotional weight far beyond its humble ingredients, reminding households that joy could still be created from scraps. For many, the memory of national pudding remains inseparable from the spirit of endurance. Meal 13. Potato pastry. Flour was precious, and wheat supplies were limited, so potatoes became a common substitute. Potato pastry was a clever creation, using mashed potatoes mixed with a little flour and fat to create pie crusts and pasties. Families used this dough to make savory pies filled with vegetables, beans, or scraps of meat. Potato pastry may not have been flaky like traditional crust, but it was hearty and filling, helping stretch a small meal into something more satisfying. Still tender. The humble potato gave families versatility. One day it was mashed with cabbage, the next day it formed the crust of a pie. In many ways, potato pastry was a symbol of wartime resilience, a reminder that, with a little ingenuity, even the simplest root vegetable could carry the weight of tradition and comfort at the dinner table. Meal 14. Oatmeal soup. Soups became a go-to way to stretch ingredients, and oatmeal was often added as a thickener. Oatmeal soup might sound odd, but it was nutritious and warming. Onions, carrots, or cabbage gave flavor, while oatmeal provided body and calories. For many families, soups were the meal that kept them going through cold winters when rations ran low. Nothing went to waste, and every bowlful felt like a victory. The oats, once considered breakfast fare, took on new life as a staple of survival. Some housewives seasoned the broth with herbs from their gardens, while others relied on a precious stock cube to give it depth. Children sometimes resisted at first, but hunger made the bowl welcome. Oatmeal soup was not just food, it was a testament to the adaptability of wartime cooks who turned plain grains into nourishment that warmed both body and spirit. Meal 15. Mock banana sandwiches. In Britain, bananas vanished from store shelves for years. For children who grew up during the war, a banana was a mythical fruit they only heard about. To soften the blow, inventive cooks created mock banana, spreads by mashing boiled parsnips with banana essence and a little sugar. Parents spread this mixture on bread, and while it wasn't the same, it gave children the idea of something sweet and exotic. It was one of the most striking examples of how resourcefulness turned deprivation into creativity. Celebrations in hard times. Despite the shortages, holidays still came, and families found ways to celebrate. Birthdays, Christmas dinners, and even small gatherings were marked with special meals, though often these meals were more symbolic than lavish. Meal 16. Christmas carrot cake. With sugar and butter rationed, Christmas cakes became lighter and simpler. Carrots, with their natural sweetness, replaced sugar in many meals. Housewives baked carrot cakes spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg, topped with a thin layer of mock icing made from margarine and dried milk. These cakes symbolized joy during the darkest winters. They reminded families that even with so little, they could still find sweetness in life. Meal 17. Dried fruit. Pudding. Dried fruits like raisins and currants were prized and often saved for special occasions. Families would soak them overnight, mix them into puddings, and steam them for hours to create dense, rich desserts. Though small, these puddings were treated with reverence, sliced thinly so everyone had a taste. Sharing was as important as eating. It wasn't just about food, but about togetherness. Meal 18. Wartime biscuits. Cookies, or biscuits, as they were called in Britain, were reimagined with margarine, oats, and golden syrup instead of sugar and butter. These wartime biscuits were crisp, hearty, and perfect with a cup of weak tea. Children often looked forward to these as treats, proving that even small indulgences could brighten spirits. Meal 19. Mock cream horns. Pastries were nearly impossible without butter, but resourceful bakers found ways to mimic them. Mock cream horns were made by rolling potato-based pastry or even bread dough, filling them with mock cream or jam. They weren't perfect, but they carried the spirit of luxury and celebration. For many families, it was enough just to feel like they had something fancy on the table. Food as propaganda governments understood that food wasn't just nutrition, it was morale and motivation. Posters encouraged families to eat more carrots, save the wheat, and grow your own. Radio shows featured meals for ration-friendly meals, and pamphlets taught housewives how to stretch every ingredient. Meals became acts of patriotism. Every clever substitution, every empty plate, and every homegrown vegetable was framed as a contribution to victory. Families weren't just cooking, they were serving the war effort from their kitchens. The emotional weight of food. Behind the ingenuity, there was hardship. Families missed the foods they loved, children longed for treats, and mothers worked tirelessly to put meals on the table. Yet in that struggle, meals became more meaningful. Food wasn't just survival, it was love, sacrifice, and resilience. Every dish, no matter how simple, told a story of determination. And when the war finally ended, the return of food abundance felt like a miracle. Bananas, chocolate, sugar, and butter were celebrated like treasures because families remembered what it was like to live without them. Lessons from the wartime kitchen. Looking back, the meals people cooked during World War II rationing remind us of a truth that goes beyond history. Food is more than just what's on a plate. It's resilience, creativity, and care. It's proof that even in the hardest times, families can find ways to nourish not just their bodies, but their spirits. From Walton pie to carrot cake, from mock banana sandwiches to powdered egg scrambles, these meals carried families through one of the darkest chapters in modern history. They may not be glamorous, but they are unforgettable, and they carry lessons for us even today. So, the next time you sit down to a meal, think about the ingenuity of the families who once cooked with so little. Try one of these meals, share it with your loved ones, and let it remind you of the resilience that can be found in the simplest ingredients. Because history isn't just in the books, it's in the kitchens, the meals, and the meals that shaped generations.